And now, the survival show that once survived a Boy Scout troop armed with a giant Snoopy balloon. In this episode, we sit down once again with our friend, your friend, Marshall from Going Gear. Today, we're gonna geek out on knives. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 151. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Howdy, Marshall. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You are one of my favorite guests. I have to say that right now because, of course, I am a 10-year-old boy, and I have a gear affliction, and today we are truly going to meet that childish gear affliction with talking about knives.
So I need to listen to some of your other podcasts, I guess, to see if you say that to other guests or not.
You say that to all the guests.
I need to know I'm special.
Well, dude, thanks for coming back on again today. We always have such a good time. You know, even before the show and after the show, we always have such a good time just BSing about stuff. But today, of course, we're going to talk about knives. And I figured let's just dive right in and start talking about pocket knives. And I guess we'll start someplace simple, which is, what do you find to be the most useful size or blade length for a pocket knife? Now, I mean, obviously, I know it kind of depends on the task, and we can get through that. But just in general, or even if we want to break it down through the different kind of EDC versus bush, going out in the woods and stuff like that.
So assuming it's legal where you are, most people, generally from what we see, it's between 3 and 3.5 inches. Probably 3 1/4 would be the average size that we sell anyway. I generally go for around 3 1/4, 3.5. That gives you a large enough blade where you can slice into things like, if you're using it to cut a steak or cut an apple, or, I'll get a plum and slice off a piece for my daughter or something like that, where you have enough blade in there to be able to get into the material and slice through without it gunking up the handle or anything like that. Around the 3 to 3.5 inch is a good size for pretty much anybody. Again, assuming they're allowed to carry it. There's
all right, of course. Yeah.
A lot of countries and places where there's all kinds of different restrictions, but that's a good size.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was getting ready to kind of dive into locking mechanisms, and then you were talking about the legality issues. And it reminded me, most Swiss Army knives are not locking blades. And so when does it actually make sense to have a knife that is not locking?
Again, if you're in a country where that's legally required. That's, honestly, personally, I think that's pretty much the only situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a safety issue. You're talking about a strength issue. You don't want basically the knife closing on you. And I don't know if you've ever had it happen to you, but when I was a kid, I remember doing stupid stuff with my Swiss Army knife, and the locking mechanism they have, the slip joint, just closed on itself. I was kind of digging a little notch. We're doing the friction fire kind of thing in the Boy Scouts. We're learning how to do friction fire. So I was carving out a little notch, and the knife slipped and it closed on my finger. And that, wasn't the most pleasant situation. There's not really any reason to have a slip joint, in my opinion. Some people just like them. You've got the old case knives and the old timers and stuff like that, the styles that a lot of people grew up with, or your Swiss Army knives, your classic Swiss Army knives. They're all the slip joints where they don't have locking mechanisms. I think a large part of it's just nostalgia these days. But the vast majority of what we sell are going to be, I guess a lot of people call them more tactical knives, but they're basically folders that lock. And I definitely think that's the way to go for pretty much everybody, if it's legal.
Right, of course. So if you go on any of the knife forums, there are endless discussions about the locking mechanisms themselves. And some of that speaks to what we were just talking about, of having a strong one so it doesn't close on your fingers. But I guess, what are the more popular locking mechanisms, and why should people care?
So you've got slip joints. Slip joints are the ones like on a Swiss Army knife where it just kind of open it and it doesn't actually lock in place. You've got that metal bar on the back that kind of moves and then presses against the blade to hold it in place, but it doesn't actually lock in place. You can put some force on it and close it pretty easily. Another really popular one is called a liner lock. So if you look at the handle that's made out of a resin material like G10 or micarta or something like that, there'll be a piece of steel or titanium on the inside of that has some tension on it that when you open the blade, it slips into place and keeps it in place. I'm going to kind of go in order of my least favorite to my most favorite. So we got the slip joints, we got the liner locks. Liner locks can be done right. And there are some companies out there like Emerson and some other guys that are doing liner locks right. But a lot of companies kind of use liner locks as a way to, I guess, just not spend a lot of money, because a lot of times liner locks are pretty insubstantial materials. They can use inexpensive handle materials. They can use inexpensive locking materials and just kind of not super substantial things. And again, you're talking about being in a situation where some liner locks, you're going to have your hands when you're under pressure, or when your hands are putting pressure on the blade, that it can cause those to slip and fail. So not the most ideal thing, but again, some companies do it right. And there are some companies like CRKT that add in extra measures on top of the liner lock to help keep them in place. But generally, I'm personally not a big fan of liner locks. The next big one is probably going to be frame locks. So that's where the actual frame of the knife will have some tension on it. And then when you open the blade, the frame, one side will slip and fall, and that'll lock the blade into place. I like frame locks. The knife in my pocket is a frame lock. It's a zero tolerance. They're super sturdy because the frame of a knife is generally super sturdy. They usually hold really well if they're manufactured properly. And there's a lot of nice things that manufacturers and custom makers and stuff like that can do to them to make them super reliable, super sturdy, and they hold up really well. My personal favorite locking mechanism is a Benchmade exclusive because they have the patent on it. It's called the Axis lock. If you've ever seen like a Benchmade Griptilian or their 940 or most of their popular knives, it has the access mechanism in it. And what it is a bar or rod that goes through the knife. And when you open the blade, it actually slips into place on top of the blade. So it's ambidextrous because you've got the rod going through the whole handle and locking into place. It's super secure. They've got knives where they've tested it up to something like 800 pounds before it fails.
Holy crap.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super strong lock. There's basically zero chance that it's going to fail on you as far as, slipping out of place, because it's something you have to put your fingers on it. You have to slide it out of the way to disengage it. I really like it. I know Cold Steel has made some videos and made some claims about their locks. I'm not a Cold Steel dealer, so I can't really speak to any of their stuff. But I know that they've got some stuff they've shown in videos that's pretty strong and pretty substantial. Another one I forgot that I also don't like is a lockback. And it's kind of like a slip joint that locks. So if you think about the Buck 110? I think it's the Buck 110. I just had a brain fart on the most popular knife in the world. Pretty sure it's the Buck 110. But what it is if you're opening the blade, it'll lock into place, but the way to disengage it is on the spine or on the back of the handle.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, you got that thing you've got to press on the back of the handle. The big reason I don't like those is they're very difficult to use with one hand. It can be done. I've done it before, but I find them a lot more difficult to use with one hand. If I'm using a knife, chances are I'm holding something else or I'm doing something else. I really like my knives to be one-handed. So I like my locks to be able to be easily opened and closed with one hand. So that kind of kills lockbacks for me. So personally, I really like frame locks. I really like the Axis lock. And, there's probably a ton that I'm forgetting. And there's a lot of manufacturers that have all kinds of different proprietary locks. I mean, Spyderco has some of their own stuff. CRKT, Kershaw, a lot of those guys have locks that are only made on a few of their models. And that's it because they have patents on them.
We'll be back with Marshall in just a moment after this brief message. If you get at least 57 cents worth of value out of each episode of ITRH, consider becoming a supporting member. Join the ITRH Armada today by visiting itrh.net. There, you'll be able to read about some of the great membership benefits. Again, visit itrh.net and help us keep doing what we're doing for you here and get more than just the show. Again, that's itrh.net to find out more about the ITRH Armada and how you can help us keep the lights on and the show stay safe and sound. Now, back to Marshall. It's funny, speaking of frame locks, it's probably the listeners are hearing both of us clicking our knives because it's hard to actually talk about knives and pocket knives and these locks without sitting there and playing with your knife while you're talking about it.
I got to pull it out and make sure I'm looking at it and talking about the right things. I should have had like a spread of knives in front of me so I could sit here and play with them and make sure I'm doing the right thing.
So beyond the locks, what do you look for when you're looking at a pocket knife?
I'm definitely one of the outliers, kind of like when we talk about flashlights or when I got into my spiel about merino wool or anything like that. I'm around this stuff all day long. I've been around this stuff for a long time. I've been buying nice stuff even when I didn't work in this industry for a long time. So I'm definitely kind of a snob about this stuff. I look for really nice things. I look for, perfect fit and finish. I look for really high quality materials. I don't go super duper high end. I'm not going to carry like $1,000 knife or anything like that, but I'll easily carry a $300 or $400 knife. Is it going to be, light years better than a $50 or $100 knife? Not really. Is it going to be incrementally better? Yeah, I think so. You're usually going to get better materials, especially better blade steel. You're going to get cooler materials. You're going to start already adding in like titanium and carbon fiber and some nice touches like the lock bar stabilizers where the lock bar doesn't have over travel. And what I'm talking about with that is, so if you think about like a frame lock, so you've got just the frame of the knife is your lock, right?
Mm.
What's to keep it going from the other way? So, I mean, if you're pushing on it with your thumb, you can basically push too hard. And materials like titanium and some other metals, they don't have the best memories. So if you bend them too far, they don't snap back into place all that well. So all of a sudden, you basically ruined your possibly hundreds of dollars of knives. So companies like Zero Tolerance and some other guys out there are doing things where it prevents that from traveling too far. Like you can't push it past the point where it's supposed to go. You start spending more, you get touches like that. The biggest one that you're usually going to get is going to be a better blade steel. And people always ask about that. Like, what am I getting when I spend $20 versus $200? The biggest difference is going to be materials. You're not talking about, I think we've talked about this before, but you're not talking about going up against like a fashion brand or something like that. Most of these companies, you're not really just paying for a name. You're usually paying for better manufacturing, better materials. So the best parallel I can give is like, the kind of clothes you're going to be getting at Target, like your Champion and that kind of stuff versus your high-end outdoor brands like Patagonia and Arc'teryx and stuff like that. It's not just that they have the name, it's that they have better manufacturing, they have better materials. You're going to see the same kind of thing in most of these industries. But when you get a better blade steel, two of the big things that you get a lot of times are, for one thing, better corrosion resistance. And then this is when, of course, we're talking about the stainless steels.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that you're going to get is better edge retention. So you're using a knife on a daily basis. You're using it to cut a lot of stuff. If you're using a soft steel like they use for most of the Swiss Army knives or a lot of the, your $20 to $50 knives, they don't have the best edge retention because you're going to find yourself sharpening it a lot, or you're never going to sharpen it and you're going to have a dull piece of crap before, the first month that you started using it. So like my Zero Tolerances, I very rarely sharpen them because they hold an edge really well. You can get a nice hair popping edge on there and it'll hold it for a really long time. So me personally, I look for things that have really good ergonomics, really good materials, really good fit and finish. I've mentioned them several times. I'm obviously a big fan of Zero Tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could get a Zero Tolerance with the axis lock, but that's a Benchmade patent. And I love Benchmade too. They make some really cool stuff. But I like the flipping designs. I like flippers. So like the ones where you have where you put the finger on it and you flip it and it flies open and snaps into place.
Mm-hmm.
I like those when combined with ball bearings. So there's some companies that are putting ball bearings as the pivot mechanism. So instead of using washers where in between the blade and the handle, they're putting ball bearings in there. So just super smooth action. And Zero Tolerance is doing a lot of ball bearing flippers, and I'm a big fan of those. If Benchmade ever came out with those, I'd probably start carrying one of those too.
Oh, neat. It's funny you mentioned Benchmade. That's actually what I keep clicking is I have the Benchmade Triage that I've had for forever now. And speaking to the stainless, I actually put this in my pocket when I go surfing.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of discoloration and rust on it, but even usually when we go out, we're out in the salt water for 2 hours at a time, and then I don't wash the thing until I get home, which is another 2 hours later, and it's still just fine.
The Triage is a really cool knife. I carried one of those myself for a while, and the steel they use is called N680, and it's a really, really corrosion-resistant knife. So you can actually do exactly what you're talking about. If you're taking it out into salt water, or if you're around like even fresh water or people that have sweaty hands or anything like that, knives like that are great because they have a really corrosion resistant steel that stains less. I mean, that's what stainless means.
Hmm.
A lot of people hear stainless and they think it never stains. It means that it stains less. So it's going to rust less than your carbon steels or other stainless steels.
Hmm. Yeah, I have a few small beefs with this knife, but overall, it's been an exceptional knife.
Yeah, they make good stuff. Benchmade's definitely one of my favorite companies. Benchmade, Zero Tolerance, DPX, a lot of the higher end knife manufacturers, I like pretty much all of them. They all make some cool stuff.
Hmm. Talking a minute ago about the difference between, say, a $20 knife and a $100 knife, or a $50 knife and a $200 knife. Is a $50 knife going to get the job done at the end of the day for somebody?
Absolutely. A $20 knife will, if they're buying it from a reputable manufacturer.
Mm.
I mean, if you're CRKT, Kershaw, Boker, any of the brands that have a good reputation behind them, yeah, it's going to get the job done. Is it going to have the nice materials like titanium and carbon fiber? No. Is it going to have really substantial locking mechanisms? Sometimes, maybe. Is it going to have a great steel? No, definitely not. But it'll get the job done. If you're using it as a box cutter, which is what most of us use our knives for 99% of the time,
Hmm.
then yeah, it'll work just fine. It's just you're not going to get that extra level of performance.
Hmm.
I used to be into mountain biking a lot when I was younger. I had friends that work at bike stores, and you see the same thing in knives. Once you get past the $100 price point, you're going to start getting definitely diminishing returns. It's the kind of like in bikes when you get past the $1,000 price point, you've got to spend another $1,000 to get a 10 or 15% better bike, and it's going to be the same thing in the knife world. You're going to have to start spending a lot more money to get an incrementally better knife.
Yeah, and they get up there pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that you're going to be paying for, just like in any other industry, is made in the U.S. So Zero Tolerance made in the U.S., Benchmade's made in the U.S., Spyderco makes a bunch of their stuff in the U.S., Kershaw makes some of their stuff in the U.S. That costs money. Manufacturing here is more expensive, and they usually reserve their higher end stuff for the States. So, I mean, you're going to get your $20 knives that are made in China, maybe not the best steels, maybe not the best materials, but they'll be fine. They'll be good quality and they'll hold up. And, they're backed by really strong warranties. It's going to be where they're going to make their really cool high end stuff is all going to be here in the States.
Hmm.
And another really nice thing about the knife industry is pretty much everybody, I know everybody that we deal with, all the companies that we sell, and most of the other ones that I've seen, they have lifetime don't do something completely stupid, like snap your blade in half, doing something dumb, they'll take care of you. If it's a piece of hardware that failed or a locking mechanism that failed, you can send it back to them and they'll either repair it or replace it. So it's a pretty cool industry. It's kind of unique in that regard. It's not like electronics or something like that where you're basically buying a disposable $600 piece of something that, you drop it and there goes $600 unless you have your phone plan insurance on it.
Hmm.
These are tools that are meant to be used and abused and to be durable, and the companies back it. So I mean, they all have really strong warranties that have been tested thousands of times. So people say, yeah, man, these guys actually really honor their warranties. They make a quality product. That's one of my favorite parts about the knife industry. They like their products, they know their products, and they back them, which is, again, pretty unique in the world right now.
Yeah, that's so true. It's funny. I wasn't really going to dive into steels quite yet, but since we already brought it up, what are the big steels that people should actually look for, and of course, why?
Oh Lord,
I knew I was going to get you on a tangent. Yeah. Merino wool.
Yeah, that's a big topic. Honestly, once you start getting into any of the super steels, which are going to be any of your higher end steels and your say over $100 knives, you're going to have a lot of trouble telling them apart. If you're talking about, again, a $20 knife versus a $100 or $200 knife, it's going to become really apparent really fast, mostly with edge retention. So there are some companies out there that do amazing edge retention in their $20, $30 knives. I know Buck is legendary for doing that. There's some other companies that do really good heat treat and all that kind of stuff and get really good edge retention in their less expensive knives. But for the most part, you're not going to see that. There are going to be steels that are just not capable of holding an edge that well. They're not going to be able to be heat treated and not be brittle. So Usually, honestly, if you go with a decent manufacturer and you spend $100, you're probably going to get a pretty good steel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan right now of M390. That's what's on the knife that I'm using. Anything by Carpenter or Crucible, they both make really good steels. Well, maybe not anything. I honestly don't know their entire product line, but anything that you'll see from most of the manufacturers is usually pretty good stuff. Benchmade uses like a lot of 154 CM. There's honestly so many. There's hundreds of different steels, and it's definitely kind of a flavor of the month thing
Mm-hmm.
where a steel will get really hot and then the manufacturer will sell out of it because everybody wants it. But is it going to be radically different than the steel next to it with similar metallurgic properties? Probably not. Is it going to be better than what they're using on $10 or flea market knives? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know like LMAX was the really hot thing a while back, and it not many people were working with it. And seems like there's the higher end manufacturer like Zero Tolerance is using LMAX and stuff like that. I do have at least one knife out of LMAX, but it's a knife I don't use that often. So I never did really get a lot of experience with it. How did that steel actually end up panning out?
I mean, it's just like everything else in the world. You can find people that are the biggest fans of it, and you'll find people that say it's like the biggest piece of crap that they've ever had. If Zero Tolerance is using it, in my experience, then it's a pretty good product. I've personally owned several LMAX knives. They've all held up really well. Again, once you start getting into that world, if you're talking about LMAX versus M390 or CTS 204P or any of these high-end steels that a lot of these guys are using these days, it starts getting a little bit tougher to see a difference between them.
Mm.
One of the differences that you will see, if you look under a microscope, you can probably see some stuff, but you're going to start seeing some minor corrosion resistant differences just because of the different metallurgic properties of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, depending on the materials that go into them is going to be a big function of how corrosion resistant they are. And like you were talking about, it really depends on what you're using the knife for. Me personally, I don't really care that much about corrosion resistance as long as it just doesn't rust in my pocket, which most stainless steel knives won't. Some will, but most won't. Whereas someone like you, if you're going surfing with it, yeah, it matters a lot. The corrosion resistance matters a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm subjecting mine to pretty much one of the harshest environments it could, at least that my flesh could withstand.
Right. Yeah, saltwater is brutal on materials, especially metals. They love to rust. I have, as I've been told by my dermatologist, I have acidic sweat. So I corrode things and I degrade materials that aren't degraded by the average person.
Mm.
Apparently I have like super acidic sweat because I had a wedding ring custom made for me. And this guy's made thousands of these rings. It was out of it was a Damascus steel.
Oh, neat.
And I know Damascus corrodes really easily. And I know it's not like a very corrosion resistant material.
Mm.
But the way this guy made it, it was. And he had made them for a lot of people, and he had really good feedback and everything. He wore like rings on a daily basis. His wife wore rings on a daily basis. So I was like, yeah, I can, there's probably a pretty good chance of this holding up. Not for me. It was literally the day I got it. By the end of the day, it was rusted over. I was like, what's wrong with me?
Oh, man.
So, man, yeah, if you're like that, then you have to start worrying about the different properties. But
apparently,
for most people, it's not that big of a deal.
So now you brought up an interesting one, Damascus steel, and I know there's a lot of mystique around Damascus steel, but is there any real performance value in it, or is it strictly just pretty?
No, it looks cool. It looks really cool. I mean, if you're going for any of the guys that are making like, the true fighting knives and tactical knives and stuff like that they're actually giving to guys that are deployed or any special forces or anything like that, none of those guys are going to be using Damascus steel because, again, for one thing, it pretty much corrodes. It corrodes very, very quickly. Everyone that I've ever seen. And it's a pretty expensive material. Mm-hmm. Not that high-end steels are not expensive materials, but yeah, it's definitely a looks thing. It looks really cool.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to knife points. There are so many different styles of knife points and everything else. And I mean, with the triage, I've become a real fan of the sheep's foot just because it's harder to stab myself with. But and just the practicality of what I'm likely to use this for outside of cutting boxes open or something is really going to be, breaking glass or cutting away a seatbelt or clothing or something like that.
Right.
So, and this goes back to, you spend too much time around these things and you develop little, preferences towards strange little knives and all the wonderful magic that is knives. But I guess in general, like what, just kind of the person that's like, I just need a good knife and I'm not terribly worried about some very specialized point on it there. So what should they be looking for?
Anything that's not a Tonto, anything other than that, you're pretty much good to go. I'm sort of kidding with that. So the Tonto tip, I'm not much of a historian, but from what I've been told, it was originally developed to pierce samurai armor. So I mean, it's got a very strong point. You've got a lot of the force that kind of funnels into the point when you're piercing something. How much are you doing that on a daily basis?
Oh man, I am going out and fighting samurai every day at noon. Exactly.
If you're deployed overseas, then yeah, maybe that'd be the way to go. But for the average guy, it's not a very effective blade shape. Kind of hard to do things with it. It's not really hard to sharpen. It's actually pretty easy to sharpen. It's just not the most all-around, generally useful blade shape for most people. You kind of want some flat area to do some, kind of fine detail work with. And then you want the curvature in there, so when you're cutting into materials, it kind of bites into them and just helps pull the knife into it and helps them slice a little bit better. And if you think about the natural motion when you're doing a knife, you're generally not kind of pulling straight back. You're doing more of a swooping motion, and that's what a knife is supposed to do. That curvature will swoop into there and kind of cut into the material a little bit better. So some curvature in there is generally a good idea. And for that, the drop point blade, so where you've got your basically most pocket knives that you look at are going to be drop point, is the best way I could describe that.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got your curvature up towards the front, and then up at the top of the blade, instead of just being straight across, you've got a drop that goes down to the point of the blade. It's a good general all-around shape. You can use it for piercing if you need to. So if you need to stab it into some piece of meat or something like that, you can do that. And then you've still got some good cutting edge, some good surface on there to get into materials. I'm personally a big fan of Wharncliffe's. I really like Wharncliffe's. I think they make amazing box openers, which is again what most of us are using our knives for.
Mm-hmm.
The Wharncliffe's are where they have just the straight edge. So I mean, from one end to the other, there's no kind of curvature or anything like that. It just goes straight across. I like them. I think they look cool. Are they the most practical thing in the world? No, they usually don't generally have the strongest tips on them. So, you can have the chance of a chipped or bent tip unless somebody puts a lot of material on the tip. And then if you're talking about a lot of material, then you usually don't have the best slicing performance. But yeah, I mean, generally, if you just go for a drop point or a spear point or a Bowie style or something like that, then you're good to go.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things you should never do with a knife that I actually do like about the sheep's foot, and part of it is just the design on the Benchmade, is that it is much thicker towards the tip. It's the only knife tip I've ever used as a screwdriver in an emergency and been like, oh yeah, it'll be fine.
Oh, I mean, all day, every day, we all know we're not supposed to do this stuff, but we're like, hey, I have a knife in my pocket. Let me use that.
Yes.
It's slightly better than the keys that I
have. Yeah.
So I mean, we all know how terrible it is, but yeah, we all do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm actually really bad. So on my tripod, it has a big thumb screw. And to get that extra level of tightening, I always pull out my knife, flip it around, and I use the backside of it to tighten that little bolt, which I know is stupid, but it's what you have on hand. The best tool that you have is the one that you have on you.
Yeah, and you can replace your knife pretty easily.
I can replace my knife pretty easily.
Yeah, that's about
I've got about 40 in arm's reach. So yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, when it comes to this is kind of a bag of bees, but when it comes to the actual blade itself, as far as like what kind of grind it is, there's a ton of different grind types. But I guess to stick with the main ones, as far as flat grind versus Scandi grind versus convex, which one do you end up kind of recommending people go with?
I like flat. I like full flat, which is basically just if you put it on the edge of a table and you look at it, it's going to be the entire edge of the blade, or the side is going to be flat up against the table. So no curvature in it or anything like that from top to bottom. I like it because it gives good slicing performance. If you're doing any kind of stuff where you're slicing into a tomato or anything like that, it's not this giant chisel that's just kind of shoving material out of the way. I like a little bit of thinness towards the edge, just so it can get into things a little bit better and do a little bit better fine detail work. But again, that's a personal preference. Scandi grind is a great grind. Some of the other grinds out there, the convex and stuff like that, they're really cool. They're a little bit harder to sharpen. You need to use a little bit more specialized materials than the average person uses. Not that they're hard to get or expensive or that hard to figure out or anything like that, but it's something that some people aren't used to. So if you go buy your cheap little $10 like carbide sharpening tool, which those things just make me shiver just thinking about them, but don't buy those. Everybody, please don't buy those. When you look at them and you're using the carbide things and you pull your blade across it and you see the little metal shavings, you just knocked like a year's life off of your knife. Yeah. We have customers that'll come in and be like, "Hey man, can we send this back to the company? I'm having issues with it." And literally half of the blade will be gone because they use the carbide sharpeners on them. And yeah, they put a good blade on it or they put a good edge on it, but man, you just removed material from your blade. You should not be removing material from your blade. But yeah, I mean, some of the other grinds that are less common, they're just a little bit harder to sharpen. Honestly, man, go with one that has good reviews, good materials from a good manufacturer, and you're usually fine.
Yeah. So to get into the weeds for a second, where does convex actually shine? Like, I like convex. I think it's neat, and I like stropping knives. I mean, I strop all my knives because I'm nuts. But where does convex really end up coming into its own?
I know it's really popular, like in the bushcraft community, so outdoor materials and that kind of stuff. I have a few of them. I never end up using them because I'm super, super lazy. So I want something that's very easy to sharpen. And convex just takes a little bit more effort. And you've got a little bit more of a setup versus, throwing it on a wicked edge or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I see it a lot in the bushcraft community. So I don't know if you call it a fad or just a preconception that they have, but I assume that it does well in that world.
I do have one, and it's funny. It's a bushcraft knife, of course. And interesting enough, I do find it really good. Like, I would not have thought it to be good at this, but I found it to be probably of all the knives I have, it skins a rabbit better than anything.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. Goes through rabbits like butter. So it's...
Yeah. I'm sure there are a lot of guys that are just going to tear apart this entire podcast.
Oh, of course. It's a knife podcast. I mean, a knife show.
A lot of the stuff that we're talking about is just opinions.
Yeah.
There's definitely guys that have done, scientific level studies where they've, looked at it through microscopes and slow speed cameras and that kind of stuff just to see what the different materials do and what the different grinds do and all that kind of stuff. Man, get something that's a decent quality and keep it in good condition, and you're probably good to go.
So now, coming back to brands for a minute, what brand would you actually say stay away from?
I'm probably going to have to deal with most of these guys at some point, so I'm not going to name any names.
I was just going to see if I could goad you into that.
I will say anything you can buy at a gas station or flea market or somewhere like that. No, I take that back. I've actually been to flea markets before where I've seen some high-end stuff. There'll be guys out there with like Benchmades, and you're like, what are you doing in a flea market with a Benchmade, man?
Probably fell off the back of a truck, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if it comes in a bucket, no, I take that back too because so the Swiss Army Knife Classic, your classic keychain knife, right? That's actually what it's called, is a Swiss Army Knife Classic. It's the little guy with the nail file and the blade and the scissors.
Mm-hmm. The little bitty one?
That's a perfect little knife. It's a good starter knife for anybody. It's a good like backup knife for you to just have on your keychain. And they're great quality and everything. And they sell those in buckets. So I'm not going to say don't buy any bucket knives. Probably no gas station knives. I don't think I've ever been to a gas station in my life where they've been a quality knife. Well, any of the ones where you see on like 10 for $20 or anything like that, chances are they're going to be garbage unless somebody just got a super amazing deal. I'd say try not to go below $20, honestly. That's going to be kind of your breaking point for getting something that's just not going to fall apart on you.
To your point about the gas station knives, sometimes you do just need a 6-pack of tall boys and a knife with a naked lady on the handle.
Yeah, and like a a lighter with some sort of like racist saying on it, and you, you can get all that stuff.
I think that's just because we're both in the South. We would know that one.
I'm blown away at some of the places that, or some of the things that places will sell in public. I'm like, really,
yes.
really, man?
Yes. Oh, man. So now I've been ogling the zero tolerance hinderer, and I know a lot of people are all hot and bothered about zero tolerance. Apparently you too. So what is the obsession with zero tolerance?
Man, I've talked about this, and so I've done a few videos, not a few, I've done quite a few videos on their knives. And they just do a lot of things right. So they make good products, which a lot of companies are doing. There are a lot of companies out there making good products, but they make good products on every single thing they make. So all of their designs are good. They only use good materials. They've got a really great reputation. They've been bringing in some really hot name designers. I mean, you've got Rick Hinderer, who's a really big name right now. Mm-hmm. He's a really great guy, too. You've got Todd Rexford. You've got Les George. You've got all these big names in the knife world that they're working with, and that definitely helps bring them some attention. Mm-hmm. But, you know, discounting their not discounting their knives, but forgetting about their knives for a second, they're just a good company. You know, from the dealer side, I know that most customers that have dealt with them, or everybody I've ever talked to, are like, yeah, they're really good to deal with. They have great customer service. They fix knives if something went wrong. They stand behind their product. You know, you've got all that stuff. And again, there are plenty of companies that are doing that. But then they also, from my side, from a dealer side, they're really good to deal with. They're nice guys. They answer my emails. They send me products. They're an American manufacturer that are in super high demand. So sometimes it takes a little while for me to get the products. But when I get them, I sell them quickly. So that's nice. Mm-hmm. But other than production delays, which I completely understand, because you've got, you know, 100,000 guys trying to buy a knife that they can only make 1,000 of a month. Other than that kind of stuff, you know, they're really good to deal with. They're good guys, and I like dealing with them. And it's rare to find a company that does all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can find a lot of companies that'll do one or two of those things, but they do all of it. They're good to deal with. They have a good product. From what I've talked to the designers, they treat their designers well. They treat customers well. They treat dealers well. Man, it's rare to find that combination.
Yeah, especially in, I mean, not to start talking trash about it, but especially in the knife community in general, because it's kind of a snarky community.
There's a lot of drama out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is. Speaking of drama, moving on to fixed blade knives, that seems to be a lot of confusion for people, especially when they're getting into survival, because most people that were not already into survival and preparedness, unless it was like a knife that their dad bought them when they were a kid or something like that, don't typically have a fixed blade knife. So what should somebody, I mean, just in basic terms, what should somebody look for in a fixed blade knife?
I mean, it's honestly the same stuff that you're looking for from the folding knives. The biggest difference that you're going to find between the fixed blade knives and the folding knives is you can get some really awesome custom stuff in the fixed blade world, and it's something that a regular guy could afford. Like, I mean, a lot of the first fixed blades that I had were really nice stuff that I paid, you know, maybe $120, $150 from, and they were completely handmade by a guy that, like, he has no employees. He just makes fixed blades. Mm-hmm. You can't really do that in the folder world. If you're going for a custom folder, they start at about $500 for a decent quality one. You can get cheaper ones, but, you know, if you're going with someone halfway decent, and if you go with any of the big name guys, then you're talking about starting at $1,000, and that's assuming you can buy it from them. So if you buy it from them, it's $1,000. If you're buying it from the secondary market, if it's a really hot maker like Lucas Burnley or Todd Rexford or Brad Southard or anybody like that, you're talking about $3,000 or $4,000. So, you know, going from that kind of money to being able to go directly to a maker and saying, hey, that's a really cool knife, I want to buy it from you, here's $150. Like, it's pretty cool to be able to do that. So with the fixed blade world, you can get stuff that's handmade a lot easier than you can with the folding world. So it opens up a lot of possibilities. There are some great manufacturers making some really good stuff. You know, all the same guys that we've been talking about. Zero Tolerance has a couple cool fixed blades. Benchmade makes some good stuff. Spyderco, CRKT, KBAR is legendary for their fixed blades.
Are KBARs actually any good?
Absolutely, man. Marines can't break them, and they sure do try. So, yeah, actually, some of my favorite fixed blades are K-Bar. Ethan Becker designs for them. He used to design for Camillus before they went under, and then they got bought out by one of the companies that manufactures in China, and then slaps like a reputable name on there, like they did with Schrade and a lot of those other kind of brands. But yeah, he brought his stuff over to K-Bar, and yeah, man, they make really high quality stuff. It's all made in the U.S. It's pretty reasonably priced. The Becker BK16 from K-Bar is one of my favorite fixed blades in the world. Whenever anybody comes in to the store looking for like a good fixed blade for doing outdoors kind of stuff, that's always the one I point them to. It's pretty reasonably priced. Full retails around like $100 or so. Comes with a nice nylon sheath with a pocket for you to throw a multi-tool or a little survival kit or something like that in it. And it's a nice knife. It's got a coated blade, so most fixed blades, another big difference you're going to see between folding knives and fixed blades is most fixed blades, especially if they're in the outdoor world, are going to be carbon steel instead of stainless steel. And a big reason is because, for one thing, carbon steels can hold an edge amazingly well. They take an edge amazingly well, so you can get them super, super duper sharp, but they'll also bend instead of breaking when they're stressed. So a lot of stainless steels, when they're super stressed, when you're bending it and doing something stupid with it, it'll break. It'll just snap in half, where carbon steels will bend when they're put under pressure like that. So when you're talking about doing stuff that the bushcraft community or any of those kind of guys do, chopping through logs or anything like that, or batoning, which I do quite a bit when I'm camping, you need knives that can handle the stress. So a carbon steel fixed blade is a great way to do that. And I kind of went around on a lot of different topics on that, didn't I? And I was like,
it's fine.
I had some points in my head, and I don't think I've covered any of them. So let's cover some of those points.
Okay.
Let's talk about size. Personally, I prefer something a little bit larger than a folding knife and a fixed blade. I generally try to stick around the 4 to 5 inches. Anything bigger than that, I personally don't have any use for. I know guys like to carry like 6 to 8 inch fixed blades. And it's just like anything else, man. It's personal preference, and it's what you're going to be using it for. Some people like to use big fixed blades as choppers, so to be able to actually chop through materials and stuff like that. I'd rather use a hatchet or an axe or a kukri or something like that, something that's dedicated for chopping. But it's kind of nice to be able to carry just one tool to do all that kind of stuff, and a big fixed blade can definitely do all that. So personally, I try to stick around 4 or 5 inches, get a nice carbon steel. And a big thing that you should get in pretty much any fixed blade is going to be full tang. So full tang means that the blade material basically goes from the tip of the blade all the way to the back of the knife, the butt end, without having any tapering or cutting away or anything like that. And that's just purely for strength. So there's going to be a lot of knives that don't do that, and you're going to start seeing some snapping when they're stressed. They're just going to be not quite as strong. It's not something that's completely essential. You can get away with a fixed blade, assuming you're using it just as a knife, so general cutting tasks. And a really great brand to look at if you're doing that kind of stuff is Mora, which I'm sure you've heard of Mora knives.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that since we got on the full versus not full tang knives.
They are making a couple full tang knives now, or at least ones that are more full than they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Most of their knives are, what do they call it? Rat tang, something like that.
Yeah, rat tail, yeah.
Yeah, so what it does is once you get past the blade, once you start getting to the handle material, it tapers down a lot. So you're talking about tapering down to like 3/8 or ½ inch, and that kind of travels probably 80% of the distance to the end of the handle. And when you stress that, yeah, it can snap. Moras are definitely an exception to that. I'm not talking about that they won't snap, but they're $20. I mean, the average price on a Mora is like $20. They come amazingly sharp. They're really well made. They're comfortable. They're ergonomic. And man, they make the best beater knives. Like if I want to do something that I don't care about the knife, if I'm doing like gardening, like cutting open bags of gravel and stuff like that, there's nothing better than a Mora.
All the stuff you shouldn't be doing with a knife is what you're saying?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we bought some property here in our house. The previous owners of it, the wife was a master gardener, right? And I'm like, cool, man, this is a beautiful property. It's 4 acres, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's an acre of it that's really nicely landscaped, like beautiful landscape, like Japanese maples all over the place, and just this beautiful landscaping. And we have creeks and waterfalls and all that kind of stuff. It's a really cool property, right? I didn't realize how much maintenance it was going to be. Like just
Uh-huh.
insane amounts of yard work. So the first year that we lived here, my goal was to make it as low maintenance as possible. So I put a lot of mulch everywhere. I put a lot of gravel down on paths and stuff like that so I could just come through with Roundup and, take care of weeds. So I was cutting into a lot of bags of rocks. I was cutting into a lot of mulch, cutting into a lot of like bags of soil and stuff like that. And man, I used the Mora the entire time. And I just destroyed that knife where I did stuff that should have destroyed it. And it still has a great edge on it.
Hmm.
They're awesome knives. Would I baton with it or would I pry with it? No, absolutely not. But any cutting task, yeah, they're phenomenal. And they're $20. I mean, it's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that there's an actual difference between, say, the average run-of-the-mill camping knife you'd hand somebody and a bushcraft knife?
Not really. I mean, again, we're probably going to get people that are going to argue with us on this.
Oh yeah, well that was partially intentionally. I just wanted to wind some people up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else. The best tool that you have is the one that you have on you.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, any knife can do any of this kind of stuff to a certain extent. I've seen videos where people will take the little $20 Swiss Army Classics that we were talking about and baton through twigs with them, or not twigs, but decent sized branches. If you're careful and you take your time, yeah, you can do pretty much any task with any knife within reason. But it's when you start abusing it, you start doing it a lot. Maybe you're at the end of a backpacking trip and you're tired and you're not taking as much care. That's when you start to kind of see a difference. And, maybe you don't have as much time to be super attentive and do all the fine detail work. You just want to smash through something and, smack your knife and have it be able to cut through things easier, then that's when a nice fixed blade definitely comes in handy.
I gotcha. So now to circle back to something you were saying a little bit ago about coated versus uncoated, like the Essie knives is a pretty heavy coating, and I've run into an issue where it's like, okay, it's a good coating, but I'm kind of running in. Yeah, I can't really use a ferro rod correctly with this. I mean, now I'm having to, instead of using it on the spine, I have to use it on a knife. I guess, are there any steels besides carbon steels that are good steels for fixed blade knives that somebody could look for if that was a concern of theirs?
Man, that really depends on who you ask. Personally, if I had a fixed blade, I would only use carbon steel, and I like mine uncoated. The big thing is, like, if it gets rust on it, what's going to happen? Like, what happens if you get a little bit of rust on your blade?
You got to clean it up. You got to maybe run it over a stone again.
Is that a big deal?
No, not really.
So your answer to that question depends on what you're going to do with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So is a little bit of rust a big deal? For me, no, I don't care. It's not that big of a deal for me to do a little bit of maintenance on my knife. If I go on a trip and I get it wet and I get sap all over it and everything, I'm going to come home and clean it, or maybe I'm not. And it's not really that big of a deal if I have a bit of rust on it, because if you're cutting through some material, you're doing some batoning or something like that next time, all that rust is going to be gone, or most of it's going to be wiped away. And a little bit of steel wool, a little bit of preventative maintenance, putting some like machine oil or something like that on it, just a 10-second quick wipe down will take care of any of those issues. Or again, like you're talking about, have something with a coating on it. And yeah, that does affect some things. So then you talk about being able to strike ferro rods with the spine. Yeah, it does make it a little bit more difficult. And some of the texturing on some of the coatings, sap and stuff like that can get gunked up in it. So it's all a balancing act. What's most important to you? Is a little bit of rust a big deal? Then yeah, man, maybe go with the stainless blade and, just understand that there is the possibility that it could snap. Is it likely? No. Get S30V or any of these other kind of high-end super stainless steels that people are using on fixed blades, and chances are nothing's going to happen to it. It's all about what you personally value.
You were talking about snapping, and it leads me to wonder, who are all these people opening like paint cans and stuff in the middle of the woods?
Dude, you would be blown away with what people do with their knives. I mean, I'm always amazed at the condition that we get stuff back in. I mean, we've got this guy. So we had some issues with this guy where he became like a problem with returning stuff. And we have a pretty liberal return policy. We'll take stuff back. We try, if somebody's destroyed something or if they've abused it or if it's not in decent condition, we'll probably be like, hey man, come on, like what are you thinking? But if it's a performance issue, like if it breaks while they're using it, then within our return period, yeah, we'll take it back and we'll take care of them. So we had this guy that was kind of abusing that, and it was with flashlights. We would sell something to him, and no lies, within 2 days we would get it back. He had like put it in a dump truck and like driven down the road with it, and then taken it out and thrown it in a garbage truck and like hit the compactor a couple times. And he did this with like 3 lights in a row.
Was he making YouTube videos or something?
No, man. I'm like, what are you doing with these things? And we see the same things with knives. We got guys that are coming in with these super stout fixed blades where the blade snapped in half or it's like bent at a 90-degree angle. I'm like, what are you doing? Why did you do this? I love seeing the videos. One of my favorite things that guys will do on videos is they'll hammer a knife into a tree and then see if it can handle being stood on. Why would you do that? Like, what? I mean, I understand testing the strength, but what possible scenario would that be useful? Well, you know what I'm saying?
Like, if you're a ninja and you need to climb a wall, and the best way to do it is to hammer knives into a wall and then climb up them. Yeah, that was like somebody we both know, Phil Rose. That was one of the things. Like the only thing he didn't guarantee his knives against, as he used to say, was stupid shit. I mean, he said it even more colorfully than that. But he's like, I don't go hammering into a tree and standing on it or something. And I was like, why would people do that? He's like, you don't understand. I'm like, I don't want to know.
Understand, man. People do this. And I understand it from the guys that do like the pure torture test abuse videos. That makes sense. Like what kind of crap can I do to this knife before it fails? I get that. I totally get that. But I've seen reviews and videos of guys that are like, yeah, this is something that you may actually have to do. Like, no, man, you're probably not going to have to do that. I can't think of a scenario where that's going to happen. I would love it if somebody like sent you an email or something like that saying, I was actually in that situation and this is why.
And I had to use my knife like it was the jaws of life on a car door.
That would actually really entertain me. So if you get that feedback, I would love to hear that.
You got it. I'll be sure to share that. Speaking of things that get abused and can get broken, knife handle materials.
Yep.
I'm a personal fan of micarta, but I know there's a lot of stuff out there. So what is your take on handle materials?
So micarta is a pretty cool material. So canvas micarta and a lot of the other epoxy materials. So when I talk about epoxy materials, what they're doing is they're taking layers of, so for canvas micarta, for instance, they're taking layers of canvas and usually under pressure, they're pressurizing an epoxy in there. It kind of holds everything together and makes it super strong. But canvas micarta is pretty cool because when it gets wet, it actually raises the fiber of the micarta of the canvas, and it'll make it more grippy. So that may be a reason why you like it. I don't know. But if you have sweaty hands or you're using it to like field dress a deer or something like that, micarta can be a really cool material. It's very durable. I personally, even though it's like totally illogical, I love carbon fiber. I love titanium. Like they're not necessarily the best materials or the most lightweight materials or anything like that, but they look cool. And if done properly, then I mean you can have similar performance to micarta. You're not going to get like the raised fibers when they get wet or anything like that. But guys can put texturing on there and make them pretty grippy. With titanium, obviously, you can't do any of the stuff to make it wet and make it grippy, but you can put some texturing on there and put some jimping on the handle or put some jimping on the blade and stuff like that to make it a little bit more grippy. But man, a lot of this stuff is going to come back to personal preference. Micarta is a really good material. G10 is a really good material. So G10 is kind of similar, but it's like a fiber reinforced epoxy. Carbon fiber is great. I like titanium. For fixed blades, it's probably not the best material, but it looks cool and it's relatively lightweight. Their wood handles are obviously really popular, and there's some woods out there that actually work pretty well for an outdoor knife, like cocobolo and stuff like that. So I mean, a lot of the materials that don't necessarily have to be stabilized. Cocobolo is a naturally very oily wood, So a lot of the other woods have to be stabilized, or like temperature and humidity variations can make them crack, which isn't that big of a deal. If you're actually using it as a tool, you could just fill in that crack with epoxy and it's, just carry on about your way. But a lot of woods have to be stabilized, so they kind of pressure inject them with epoxy or other materials just so they don't have those temperature and humidity variations, or they don't cause issues.
Mm-hmm.
But wood can be a good material. Honestly, man, again, it's going to come back to personal preference. What do you think looks cool, and what's going to hold up? Micarta holds up really well. G10 holds up really well. Most woods will hold up really well. Most of the plastics are going to hold up, of course, really well because it's plastic and you beat the crap out of it. Carbon fiber is lightweight and it's really strong. There's a lot of cool materials out there that people are using.
Neat. So now to actually take into account how it feels in a hand, there's the discussion of hot spots, and to some degree that's self-explanatory, but for people that have maybe just always said, yeah, you got to look for hot spots, but never really sat and thought about it. What are you really looking for when you feel one in your hand and when you're like, okay, this one will work and this one won't?
Pick up a knife and put a decent grip on it. I mean, I'm not saying like a white knuckle grip because, when are you ever going to do that with a knife? You shouldn't be doing that with a knife, but put a decent grip on it, put some pressure on the handle. And if you feel any uncomfortable spots, just think about what that's going to feel like if you're actually field dressing a deer, or, whittling something, or using the knife for any kind of extended period. You're going to start being pretty uncomfortable with that knife. So hold it a few different ways, the kind of just the general ways that you would hold a knife when you're doing stuff, and put a little bit of grip on it and see what it feels like. And it's just like trying on a pair of shoes or trying on a backpack or something like that. It's going to be very quickly apparent. If you feel an uncomfortable spot, that's going to be a very uncomfortable spot after using it for a while.
Makes perfect sense. Now, what is your favorite fixed blade knife?
My favorite fixed blade knife. So this is going to sound like a total shill advertisement, but so there's a company called LT Wright Knives.
Okay.
Did you ever hear of Blind Horse Knives?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Blind Horse Knives was by two guys, and they split and formed two different companies.
Speaking of knife drama, yeah.
Yeah. They're both good guys. I like them, and I actually carry both of their products. So they split into LT Wright Knives and Battle Horse Knives, and they both make really cool stuff, mostly fixed blades, although Battle Horse has been getting into some folders that are pretty crazy. But anyway, we had LT Wright Knives make us basically my dream knife. It's got some kind of silly stuff on it. Well, my personal one does. The one that we sell doesn't. But my personal one, I actually had them put like glow in the dark liners on it, and like the flame, a pretty cool looking flame from our logo, I got put on there. And I put it up on Instagram, and I was like, "What do you guys think of the knife that LT Wright Knives made for me?" And everybody was like, "Dude, that's amazing! You have to make those. we need to be able to buy those." So we had to kind of pare it down and make one that wasn't going to be $500 or $600 because of all the stupid stuff I had them put on it. That knife, it came out amazingly well. So it's based on their Genesis design. It's I want to say it's a 4-inch blade. I should probably know this, but it's around a 4-inch blade. They make a awesome Kydex sheath for it that's got some leather built into it. Us being who we are, I actually had them put an attachment on there for a flashlight. So like a compact little pocket light has a snap-in piece on the Kydex that you could put it on there. It's got a fire steel loop, but they have fantastic craftsmanship, and they know how to design knives. Both of those companies that I was talking about, they're really good at designing knives for just general use. They've been doing this for a long time. They've made thousands of knives. They have a decent amount of people working for them. So they have really good fit and finish. And if you ever watch one of them talk about it, they'll start showing you all the different grips that you can do with it and all the different things that they put on there for, like, they have ways to orient yourself if you're up in the gut cavity of a deer or something like that. Like if the knife slips out of your hand, you can grab the knife and instantly know where you are on the knife, where the cutting edge is, without having to touch the cutting edge, which is obviously not the best thing to do when you can't see the knife. Just cool little touches like that. They went over the way that they designed everything on the knife, and I was like, man, that's awesome. So yeah, man, that's my favorite fixed blade is the Going Gear edition of the LT Wright Genesis.
Nice. When you get into, speaking of $600 knives, when you get into some of these super premiums, like we were kind of talking about a bit ago, not kind of, we were talking about a bit ago with the pocket knives, but when you get into it with the fixed blades and you're getting into the worlds of like the Busses or Bussy, or I've never known how to say their name right. Bussy. Okay. When you get into the worlds of like the Bussies of the world, are you paying for a name, or is there something extra special about these $800, $1,000, $2,000 fixed blade knives?
Nah, I mean, they're just like a lot of the other companies out there. I mean, they make plenty of $200-$300 knives.
Mm-hmm.
When you start talking about, I think they call them like their custom shop knives.
Yeah.
The biggest thing you're going to get, the biggest difference that you're going to get is going to be material. So they're going to start using some pretty crazy materials on there. It's going to be a lot of one-off things, which if you've ever produced anything, doing something once is expensive.
Yes.
You know, you've got to sometimes create custom tooling, and you don't have all your jigs set up if you're doing machining or grinding or anything like that. And doing all that stuff costs time, it costs money, and the combination of that is going to drive up the price. So when you start getting into these one-off things that are just maybe they're making one of them, or maybe just a small run of 10 or something like that, yeah, they do tend to get more expensive. But a lot of these companies are also doing the stuff that they're making hundreds or thousands of that you can get the price a lot lower. And they're using micarta and G10 and a lot of these materials that are more common and less expensive.
Okay. That makes perfect sense.
There you go.
Awesome.
You know, we didn't really talk about handle materials on folding knives. Basically, listen to the part about fixed blades and just do the same thing for folding knives. One of the things I will say about folding knives is you're going to start getting a lot more metal materials on the handles. Usually for fixed blades, there's not going to be a whole lot of metal on the handle itself. But for fixed blades, you're going to get a lot of that. You're going to get a lot of titanium and stainless steel and aluminum and stuff like that. And one thing that a lot of people don't consider with that is temperature variations. So when you start talking about using it in cold weather, it's not the most comfortable thing to grab when you first have a knife. And then if you have any kind of moisture on your hands or it's a wet environment, then you start thinking about like your hand freezing to the knife if you haven't had it in your pocket or anything like that.
Fun.
Yeah, so there's some minor, but I mean, how many people are going to be in that situation, and how often is that going to happen? For most people, just getting something that's comfortable, that has a decent amount of texturing to it, you know, assuming it's not just a straight up gentleman's folder where they're just doing it for looks or something that looks nice with a suit kind of thing. Get something where if you can hold the knife with your hand, whatever, right or left hand, and then with your other hand kind of grab the blade and pull on the knife a little bit and make sure it just doesn't slip right out of your hands. You want something with a little bit of grip, maybe a little bit of texturing on the handles, some jimping on there, just a little bit of grippiness so it doesn't slide right out of your hand. Because chances are at some point you may have some sweaty hands or something like that, and you don't want something that's just a super slick material. But other than that, I mean, pretty much anything that's, again, from a reputable manufacturer, decent materials, you're good to go. I like my carbon fiber. I like my titanium. But
and your glow-in-the-dark scales.
I love glow-in-the-dark scales, man. There's this guy. So we're talking about hinderers. We're talking about zero tolerances. There's a guy for the hinderer designed zero tolerance 0560 that was making these blaze orange scales that glowed bright green. And
that's like, freaky.
I have to have those. I have to have those. But he got super, super popular, and it got pretty hard to get his stuff. So I never did end up getting one. But yeah, man, there's some pretty cool stuff out there. Once you start getting into the really popular knives, especially the high-end stuff, or even something that's really popular like a Benchmade Griptilian, then you can get into some pretty cool options. There's a lot of aftermarket things where if you go look on some of the knife forums or eBay or places like that, you can get some pretty cool materials that'll help you spruce up your knife or help you personalize it, do pretty much anything you want to it.
Cool. Very cool. Well, Marshall, as always, man, just a truckload of, or I should say in this case, a dump truck full of information as always. And we sure appreciate having you on, man.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Before we close out today, I do want to address two very common listener emails we've been getting recently. I guess in this case, I'm using the royal we since it's just you and I these days. And that leads into the first one, which is, why hasn't there been a farm update in a long time? I miss those. We've been getting that a lot. The simple answer is Jason has been really busy with his new baby girl. And of course, Jonathan is also very busy with his new baby boy. Both of them are very busy with work. And Jason has been really busy with his new ranch project, which I think is awesome. And I always hope him the best of luck on that, him and Scooter, of course. So we really haven't had the opportunity to sit down and do an ITRH farming update. And to be honest, the farm updates are just not as good or as funny if it's just me telling you about it. It's so much better when Jason's here for us to poke fun at each other, tell stories about each other, and, the show as it was, the farming updates as they were. So that said, look for an update in January. There's a lot to tell about Jason's cowboy adventures and what's been going on the ITRH farm as well. There's been some big changes and quite a few survival/life lessons learned on the ITRH farm recently. The next email that I would say we have been getting a ton of recently are questions about what our thoughts are on the Paris terrorist attack and what people should be doing to prepare for terrorism. Here's the thing. Nothing has really changed. There are terrorists. They're killing people. Most politicians are saying incredibly stupid things, offering enough bullshit to stop a team of oxen in their tracks. That's not just the left, by the way. You know me, I despise them all equally. And every single one of them has yet to disappoint recently in the total tonnage of bullshit being spewed out. Just mind-boggling nonsense, even for politicians. It's like kabuki theater, folks. And if you don't really know what kabuki theater is, let me just tell you this. It's total and utter nonsense. And the way you're supposed to enjoy kabuki theater is to get completely and utterly smashed. Yes, that is the entire point of kabuki theater. Total nonsense that you get drunk to enjoy. That kind of sums up a lot of what goes on in our nation these days, because you look at the things politicians are saying and the things that people are going along with and pumping their fists and saying, yes, that's the answer. And you just have to wonder, is everybody shit-faced? It's total nonsense. Here's what you really need to know. It should not change the way you prep. You should always be aware, but not consumed by what's going on in the world. You should always be ready to defend yourself and evacuate an area. Be prepped and ready for the most likely things to happen in your life. Being caught in a terrorist attack is not one of them. And if you're following the first two things, nothing changes anyway. Does what happened in Paris and Africa make me mad? You bet your ass it makes me mad. Does it make me want to dump all of my savings into more stored food and ammo? You bet. But what I'm doing instead is prepping for the next 5 years of my life. That includes dedicating time to finishing an engagement ring design for Jennifer, trying to figure out about selling the bachelor pad / IDRH studio, planning a small wedding, looking for a house that will fit us better as we work towards building a family together over the next few years. And, of course, trying not to strangle the ever-living shit out of each other through the whole process. I don't often share a lot of my personal life here. And today I'm not really doing it except to illustrate a point, and that's this. Focus on the things that you can directly impact. Focus your mind, your time, and your finances wisely. Don't event-based prep. Steady as she goes, roving horde. One more thing before we close out the show today. If you get at least 57 cents worth of value out of each episode, consider becoming a supporting member. Join the ITRH Armada today by visiting itrh.net. There, you'll be able to read all about some of the great member benefits and become a supporting member today. Again, visit itrh.net and help us keep doing what we're doing for you here and get more than just the show. That's itrh.net. Show notes, links, and the ability to comment on this episode can be found at intherabbithole.com/E151. And with that, we wrap up episode 51. Thank you for joining us. From the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.